was really amazed because I knew him since I was 14. When I was 14, I became a glider pilot. I got gliding instructions and I became interested in World War II aviation. And maybe I should start with how I came to know Gunther. That was in 2001 when I ran into the Commander-in-Chief of the new German Luftwaffe, who had written some of the books I publish and who asked me if I would consider it worthwhile getting in touch with General Rall in order to write his memoir. We agreed to meet. I drove to his home in Bad Reichenhall. We had a talk. He frankly said, "You can write about me what you like. I won't give a shit about that, but I never will have written an autobiography, something in first person singular." So one of his dominating character traits, in my opinion, is his modesty. He is the least vain person I ever met. Given all he has achieved and all he has done for his country, he is really a very, very modest guy. I managed to get around that. You know, I was driving home quite disappointed and thought, oh, I'll never turn that thing, you know. But then it dawned on me that it might be worthwhile compiling a list of his fighter pilot buddies who had done first-person singular biographies. And I compiled that list that started at A with Bud Anderson and ended at Y and Z Herb Zemke. Drove back to Bad Reichenhall, put that list on the table and said, now look, General, do you think all these guys are vain bullshitters? And he said, oh, no, they aren't. This one goes to you, young man, and now we're going to give it a try. This is how our relationship started. It took quite a while, you know, to get real close to him. People who had lived through so much in World War II are most likely to shut off several things they experienced. But when someone opens his personality and is about to write down his life and speak about his life, you get real close. So he's not only a modest guy, he's somebody who is likely to really reflect himself, think about the past, think about things he has done, he was forced to do. And let me make a third point, he's also got a sense of humor I like very much. We came into Oshkosh on Wednesday morning and we were walking across the Warbirds area, talking a little, looking here and there, and suddenly he stops, he looks around, says, gosh, Kurt, did we shoot down so few? So this is the three elements, the three most dominating character traits, you know, that fascinate me with this man. He's got a sense of humor, he is very, very much reflecting himself, and he is all but vain.
Yeah.
It was in 1943, Gunther was fighting in the southeasternmost party of the occupied territory of Germany, that is close to the Caspian Sea. Hitler wanted to get hold of the oil fields at the Caspian Sea. He had to get hold of the oil fields in order to go on with war. Had he not, he knew himself and he said that I would have to finish with the war. So Gunther was fighting at the southeasternmost part of the occupied territory. He had 3 sorties a day. He fought at odds all the time. And once he returned from the last mission of one day, he got rung up by his wing commander saying, Gunther, would you just jump a jeep and come over because the hangman's waiting here for you? And I said, oh, what is it all about? He jumped the jeep, he drove over to the headquarters of the wing, and there sat a Luftwaffe judge. I think as in the U.S. Air Force and in the U.S. Army, also the Luftwaffe had kind of a justice system, you know. There sat a Luftwaffe judge who confronted Gunther with the fact that his now wife, Hertha, whom he even didn't know, in 1938. In 1938, shortly after Austria had been conquered by Germany, had helped Jews of Vienna to escape to England. Hertha was a medical doctor, and she had friends who were also medical doctors, Jewish friends. Many medical doctors were Jewish, especially in Vienna. So he helped them get to England, get a working permit, and they were allowed to work as medical doctors in England, I think 5 weeks after they had emigrated, which gave them quite an advantage because they could build a new existence in England. And now somebody in the quarters, in the block where Hertha had lived in, had given these facts to the Gestapo, to the Secret Service of Germany. And they had passed it on to Luftwaffe juridical system, and now this judge sat before Gunther. And Gunther put it in very frank terms. He said, "What do you think are we doing here? I just came home from my third mission, and we are fighting at odds of 1 to 10. You can just kiss my ass and piss off." And that put an end to the story in the first place. But when he was awarded the oak leaves, he had to summon to Hitler, because Hitler decorated soldiers with the who had earned the oak leaves in person. And Goering, a very vain man, as the commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, wanted all of those who had been decorated by Hitler to report at him at his hunting lodge in eastern Prussia immediately afterwards. Gunther drove there by train with 4 other men who had been decorated by Hitler in the headquarters. And Goering put that on the agenda again by screaming when the 5 men were reporting in front of him, "My dear Rall, I have the pleasure of telling you that I closed both eyes and a few eyes more with that Jewish thing that your wife did in Vienna." And of course all the other officers looked at Gunther and said, "Hey, what is it all about? Tell us the story." And I think that Goering did that with the clear intention of letting others know that Gunther was ideologically not a safe man. And when I dug into history, I found out that there were similar cases. There was a night fighter, Colonel Helmut Lent, the top scorer of the night fighters in Germany. His father was a Protestant priest, his brother was a Protestant priest. His father and he, Lent himself, was a very religious man. He never signed an order with the formula Heil Hitler. He never did. He just signed as Helmut Lent, but it was ordered that every order had to be signed with Heil Hitler. He never did the so-called Führergruß, that is, raise your right arm. And this was, by the way, this was also an order from 1944 on, that every soldier had to use the Hitlergruß and not salute in the way soldiers usually do. Lent never did that. So the Nazis imprisoned his father and his brother and had them as kind of hostages, you know, to keep this man from publicly saying what he was thinking about the system. The Nazis were, in a way, in a dilemma. They needed heroes. They needed heroes. But most of those who became heroes, like Gunther, who shot down 275 enemies, were very bright and intelligent men. And the Nazis had to look for means to control these guys, because when they once they were popularized via the media, they were likely to say things that wouldn't fit into the ideology or into war strategy or what the hell, you know. So they had to find something that would keep these guys from telling the wrong things. That was, in Gunther's case, his wife and helping Jews escape to Vienna. In Lent's case, it was his father and his brother, who were imprisoned by pure will, you know. There was nothing like anything they had been accused, or they weren't sued or anything. They were just put in prison so he wouldn't say a thing publicly against the Nazis. I started as I was studying journalism because I always wanted to become a journalist. I spent some time in a major German publishing company, in fact the second largest in Germany. In the course of the German reunification, they discovered that I also had a scientific education as a communication scientist, and I had to do many things that had not much to do with journalism, but very much to do with strategy. And I always hated that. I wanted to have to do with people. So I looked for ways to get back to the regular world. I shifted into public relations, working with Hewlett-Packard in Germany for a couple of years, and finally heading the corporate communications department of Microsoft Germany from 1996 to 2002. The German subsidiary of Microsoft is the second largest outside the United States, only headed by Japan, and followed by the UK. That was quite an experience, and from that I drew the self-confidence to say everything I learned here at Microsoft I can employ to do my own thing. And I always wanted to match my passion for flying and my passion for writing and for history. So as a child, as a schoolboy, we weren't taught much about the Third Reich. Of course, we learned about the Holocaust. Of course, we learned about that period between 1933 and 1945, but not to a very outstanding extent. Because, you know, the generation who taught us had taken part in this war, and they became teachers afterwards, to put it in simple terms. But it was the generation who fell victim to Hitler and who fought his war, and they didn't want to talk much about it. You know, even the Gunther Ralls at that time didn't want to talk much about the times between 1933 and 1945, because they all had been cheated or felt cheated, and they all had felt exploited by a dictator. And in fact, they spent their best times in lives wearing uniforms and fighting a war, which isn't fun at all. After World War II, Germany was absolutely smashed to pieces, economically in every respect. And most of the generation of my parents, who were born between 1920 and 1928, had much to do with rebuilding the country, building up their own lives. Because, you know, my dad became a soldier when he was 18, and then he hadn't learned a thing but to be a soldier. Now he had to make his living in a country that was disarmed. So they had lots to do, trying to make their living and to build up an existence. And in a way, a huge silence went down on everything that had to do with the Third Reich. I grew up as a kid, and my parents hardly discussed war. Even when they were talking amongst themselves, even when they were talking with friends, war was not an issue. The Third Reich was not an issue. I learned about the Third Reich at school, a little. That fueled my interest in the Third Reich, and then I began reading as a kid between, say, 7 and 12 years. I draw the conclusion from little signs that there must have been something wrong with my parents. You know, in the small city where I grew up with 12,000 inhabitants, we had a volunteer fire brigade. And whenever there was a fire somewhere, the sirens were pushed on in order to call the men together and fight the fire. In World War II, sirens were pushed on when there was a bombing alarm. My mother was 16 when she was posted to Berlin as a nurse. And as a 16 to 19-year-old, she experienced all the bomb raids on Berlin. And I recognized an immense nervousness whenever a siren was pushed on with my mother. It was close to grabbing us kids and pushing us into the cellar, into the basement, you know. And she never talked about it. She never talked about it. Now, I think it was in the early 80s or late 70s. The German TV broadcast a series in 3 parts that had been imported from the US, which was entitled Holocaust. And Holocaust covered the entire history of a Jewish family from, I think, the mid-20s till their extinction in 1945 in Auschwitz. And now we ask, our parents did not say, you are not to look that. We were sitting in front of the TV screen, the whole family, 5 heads, 3 children, my parents, and looking this TV series. And my sister, who was a year younger than I, and I got really outraged. We said, come on, don't lie at us. You must have seen all that. Don't tell us you did not see what was going on. And the whole family was in quite a mess and in heated discussions for weeks. And now everything came out, you know. My mother told me about the Jews in my hometown and how they were dealt with. My mother told me about the Jews in Berlin. My dad told me what he had experienced with the so-called final solution of the Jewish question. And now they started talking. It was actually an American TV series that got not only my family, but got the whole of Germany to talk between generations. And if you hear Gunther talk, you will find out that most of what he claims for his generation and most of what he reflects as far as his own life is concerned is not specifically German. It is human, all too human. From time to time, when I have visitors from the United States over here, I take them to the Dachau concentration camp memorial site. And more than once I get asked, do you feel ashamed as a German seeing all this? And my honest answer is, I don't feel ashamed as a German, I feel ashamed as a human. Because what we call culture and civilization, in my opinion, is only a very thin skin over a glowing chaos. And if somebody rips that skin, that's where we have been in the Third Reich. During wartime, he only could live from one day to another and plan from one day to another. There was nothing like planning ahead for even a week or a month, because you were driven by the things that were going on. I mean, he can tell you what happened in these days in early 1945 when he surrendered just a few miles away from his home of today. But we never have thought and talked about what he felt at that time, you know. I also think he felt quite a lot of relief because his wife was only 20 kilometers from here. I think she was pregnant or had just lost a child, so he really had to care for her. And once he told me the decisive thing about surrendering to the Americans was that I definitely knew at that very point the war is over and I have survived. That was the most important thing. No matter what will come, no matter how long I will be in captivity, but I have survived and once I will return. And he always cared a lot for the people who were under his command. That is what I am very, very sure of. And maybe he is an exception at that. Not all of the German commanders were cut off the same wood he is. I can remember that when it came to surrendering and he had just to disband his unit, which was a complete fighter wing, he ordered his staff to give the toolboxes to the mechanics so they could walk away with them and build up their own businesses in civil life, you know. And this is one thing that really indicates this man thinks ahead, and he thinks what his people can do, the people under his command can do, to build up something beyond World War II. And he often tells me when we meet or when we talk on the phone that he lays awake at night and asks himself, why me? The best of my generation have been gone, why me? Coming to the United States with Gunther was a complete surprise for me. The way he was received really was a surprise. It was just smashing. You wouldn't experience something like that over here in Germany, because to many Germans, Gunther is just unknown. He's only known to a very special audience, and he isn't the one who attends each and every meeting and each and every air show and things, you know, and loves to be celebrated by other people. But he's known very much. In Oshkosh, it was almost impossible to jump on the golf cart and drive more than 100 feet without being stopped and asked, aren't you General Rall, and can I have my book signed, or can I have my cap signed, and things like that. You know, he's very popular there. And what really impressed me was that he's just respected as somebody who fought on the other side in World War II, but did the best for his country. Excuse me. I must confess, I'm really proud of knowing men like Gunther. I feel proud about conserving that history, and I'm very, very sure, maybe not in my generation, but there will come generations that will value what I did, that will really cherish what we did, and that will take to these books and try and learn something about German history. This book also has, of course, become part of my life. This man has become part of my life. And I'm very sure one day I will miss him a lot. That is all I have to say.